Hey everybody, it's Garrett, and I wanted to let you know that I got this really cool, like, whiteboard thingy that's like mini whiteboard, or some mini whiteboard. It's kind of cool, and I used it to write the topic of today's video. The topic of today's video is Literary Analysis 101. Whether you are a student looking to research or being forced, subjugated against your will to write research papers for your English classes or other history classes, science classes, whatever you're writing papers for. Or you're one of those deranged lunatics that actually does write literary analysis pieces when you are just doing things in your own time. You want to get a general sense of what literary analysis actually is, because having that general sense will give you a better idea of how to navigate not just the papers, but the research and the intention of what you're writing as the research unfolds. Now, I will start off by saying that I am by no means the best literary analyst ever. If anything, I'm probably like the bottom tier, but there are reasons for that, and much of that has less to do with my knowledge of literary analysis and more to do with just me being my crazed self, hence why I called people who do literary analysis deranged lunatics. Anyways, so the first thing to understand with literary analysis is that whenever you, or honestly, generally getting like research done first is going to be a better way to pivot into how you're going to write a paper or how you're going to write the analysis that you need to write. And it's not always going to start as very solid. Like most of the time when you're doing research on literature or research on literature, or like research on a book, the historical context, the time period, trying to make a connection between one piece of literature to another, trying to connect a piece of literature to some modern day historical event, trying to break down the specifics and nuances of semantics within the literary piece you're wanting to break down. Before you even start writing the paper, you want to start the research beforehand, and you want to get the general research, like the gist of the piece. For instance, if I was to start writing literary analysis about T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, I would start with obviously reading the piece first off, and then the second thing I would do is look up the research. When did it come out? And why did T.S. Eliot write The Wasteland? What compelled him to do so? What were the things going on in his personal life? What were the things going on in the world? For my analysis, am I going to attach the circumstances surrounding that piece of literature to the piece of literature as it is written and as it has been, as it developed? Again, though, you really want to get some general research down, just a general feel for the piece that you are going to be writing about. And then the second thing is that you also want to start with like a brief outline of sorts. There are different types of outlines for doing literary analysis, and if you're doing like literary analysis for like a classroom or class, you're generally just going to have to do the best you can with like creating a very specific regimented outline. When it comes to doing literary analysis outside of the classroom, it's pretty free range. You can do your outline. You can also just choose to skip the outline and go straight into writing the piece that you're doing. I know a couple years ago I wrote an article for the Science Fiction and Fantasy Poetry Association blog that examined poetry about or pertaining to Mars. And I didn't really do an outline for it. I just kind of started writing about it, I found some pieces that I gravitated towards to show the examples, and that kind of encompassed, that I felt kind of encompassed the broadest swath or aspect of what poetry about Mars entailed, what it represented, what it signified, and I used that to argue that the human experience never leaves us, no matter how far we go out into these other planets to write creatively, write fictionally. And that came from a lot of just generally interpreting and reading the pieces, and also what I felt compelled to say in the piece for the literary analysis. Obviously, like I said, if you're doing it for a classroom, you're going to have to do a little bit more specific research. You're going to have to get more on the ground with what you're working with. Again, the specifics and nuances. But as I said, if you're just doing literary analysis for literary analysis sake and looking to post it online or do something online with it, feel free to just skip the outline or do whatever pattern of organization for your writing makes sense to you. And probably the second thing is that with literary analysis, you're not always looking to reinvent the wheel. With literary analysis, you're just looking to break down a piece. And you're looking to break down that piece for maybe self-understanding. You're looking to break down that piece while providing a slightly altered angle on an existing angle. Or maybe you are trying to go at a completely new angle. I know I said you don't necessarily have to, but if that's your take or that's your go at things, then go ahead and try that. As another research paper example, I wrote and compared Martin and Meditations on the South Valley by Jimmy Santiago Baca to the nameless character in No Man's Sky. I believe that was the one that I did it with. No, The Long Dark. The Long Dark, there you go. I took a piece of literature and I compared it to a video game, and that was the paper. It was a compare and contrast of sorts, but it was also based more on the themes and symbolism found within both texts or both creative works. And yeah, just really just trying to find that angle. And then third, for literary analysis, there are different, especially in literary theory, there are different ways to analyze a piece beyond just writing about it from a cultural context or writing about it from a 3-point process. In school, we're kind of primed to do these 5-paragraph essays and papers, but that's usually just in general education. Once you get out of general education, the 5-paragraph paper becomes redundant, or it just becomes seemingly irrelevant. Not necessarily irrelevant. Something can come out of a 5-paragraph paper if it is well written, but in the other regards to things, usually paragraphs are going to be organized by the specific arguments being made, as well as the feel of how the, not necessarily argument, but how the analysis progresses. Like, you don't just want to sit there and have your 5 paragraphs and have that be it, when you can have 5 to 10 more paragraphs that further support the analysis or the argument within the analysis that you are trying to make. And it's always going to be important to establish that argument first and foremost, usually within the first 2 paragraphs, and then proceed to go from there to do your literary analysis. Like I said, in the wider world, barring classes and school papers and whatnot, in the larger world, literary analysis is actually a lot more entertaining and it's a lot more fun to do. There have been papers written on, the history of how tornadoes and tennis interact with one another, the physics of tornadoes and tennis balls, I guess. I don't remember the specific name, but I'll try and link it in the description if I can. There have been One of my favorite papers was actually about Alaskan, or yeah, more like the Scandinavian poetry. There's one paper that I read. There's a power metal band that I like called Falconer. That's Falconer. And they did a linguistic breakdown of the lyrics in Falconer's music. And I thought that was a really fun paper for me to read. And I would never have found that unless I had just gotten curious about the linguistic language of a band that actually wrote and had a little bit more substance to their lyricism. These things can be looked at and viewed and researched and analyzed. Um, I feel like school and classes can kind of make these things seem redundant, and I think that's a real disservice. Like, yes, you have to write your papers for class, but on the other hand, you can also just write for the pleasure of writing. You can also just analyze things for the satisfaction of knowing that thing or that subject or that topic. And yeah, so that'll do it for today's video. And if this video makes sense, great. If it doesn't, great. At this point, I'm starting to really like these rambling videos. I think they're really entertaining for me to do. I know they're probably boring as shit for other people to listen to, but you know what? We all live once, okay? We all live once. I promise you, and what I'm doing is just gonna knock your socks off. Keep analyzing.